will call to order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Community Development Committee for the Metropolitan Council. I'm the committee's chair, Robert Lilligren, joined by a quorum of the committee, and I think committee members will have a couple more joining as well. We should have a good attendance today. Welcome everyone that's here. Appreciate your being here. Looking to the agenda, the first item is the approval of the agenda, and unless there are any changes to be made by committee members, we will consider it approved. It looks like we have approved agenda. Thank you. Next is the approval of the August 21st, 2023 Community Development Committee minutes, which you have seen. They've been circulated beforehand. Committee members, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, council members. Any discussion, addition, corrections? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Welcome, council member. Next, we'll move on to our non-consent business items. We have two. The first is item 2023-206. It's funding recommendations for the 2023 Round 1 of Livable Communities Act pre-development grants. And Hannah Gary is here to present. Ms. Gary, welcome. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, committee members. I am Hannah Gary. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a planning analyst in community development. And today I'm presenting the funding recommendations for the 2023 Livable Communities Act pre-development grants. And I also want to recognize that there are cities and project teams representing some of the recommended projects today. And I just want to thank everyone for being here.
Great. And Ms. Gary, maybe after your presentation, they can just sort of stand and identify themselves. That would be great to know who's here. We appreciate your partnership. Ms. Gary.
So the Livable Communities Act has several goals that are shared across all of its funding programs. Those goals are to create more housing choice across the region, create more living wage jobs, support environmental sustainability through reducing greenhouse gas emissions and conserving natural resources, and to improve regional connections. And across all of the programs, there is an overarching goal of the LCA programs to realize more equitable development outcomes. LCA's pre-development program grants are for applicants who are in the early stages of a physical development or redevelopment project that has the potential to achieve LCA and Thrive 2040 goals. Pre-development grants are intended for projects that need to complete additional work to fully shape and detail the final development. Pre-development grants typically include a range of activities, which include but are not limited to feasibility analysis, various project studies, infrastructure and system engineering, development and planning needs, and community engagement. As part of the fund distribution plan that was adopted in February of 2023, the council approved up to $2 million for LCA pre-development grants to be awarded in 2 application rounds with $1 million available in each funding opportunity. These funds are also shared with the policy development program, which is offered concurrently with the pre-development program. On July 21st, 12 pre-development applications were received for round 2 of pre-development funding. These applications were reviewed by an interdisciplinary team of council staff. Applications are scored in 3 evaluation categories. The project outcomes, which is how the project is meeting LCA and Thrive goals. Project process, which includes community engagement and an understanding of who will benefit from the project. And project team, which includes partnerships and representation of the project team. Applicants need to have a minimum score of 22 in order to be eligible for funding. This scoring process has yielded a staff recommendation for the 2023 round 2 funding opportunity that the Metropolitan Council awards 6 Livable Communities Act pre-development grants totaling $898,600 and authorize the executive director of the Community Development Committee to execute the grant agreements on behalf of the council. So this table is a summary of all 12 applications, and this table is also available in your staff report. The 6 projects recommended for funding are from the City of Brooklyn Center, the City of Minneapolis, the St. Louis Park EDA, and the City of St. Paul. These applications were the highest scoring projects given the $300,000 per city funding cap. The projects in gray are not being recommended for funding simply due to funding constraints. The project highlighted in red was not eligible because it did not meet the minimum score. There is $1 million available for round 2 of pre-development and policy development. After the recommended award of $898,600, there is $101,400 remaining. The funds available for pre-development are shared with the LCA Policy Development Program. And with that, I'm going to share a brief overview of each of the projects being recommended for funding. The City of Brooklyn Center application is for one phase of a larger development of an area that they have identified as the opportunity site. This phase includes a child care center, wellness services, a business center, and a barber and beautician suites. The child care center will be affordable and open 24 hours a day to accommodate parents working non-traditional schedules. The team is requesting funding for architectural services. Staff are recommending the full funding request of $300,000. The first of 2 City of Minneapolis applications is for the Unity Building project. The project team requested and is being recommended for a $150,000 award. The project will redevelop an area that currently houses 2 dilapidated buildings. The new development will be a 4-story commercial building that provides space for small businesses primarily owned by immigrants and residents of color. The project team is focusing on having a space that is culturally relevant for the majority Latina and African population in the area. The project team is requesting funding for developing a travel demand management plan, architectural design, and assessing environmental sustainability options. The developer on this project has been a participant in the Minneapolis Developer Technical Assistance Program, or DTAP program, and is a newer developer. The second City of Minneapolis application is for the Cora, which is a mixed-use intergenerational development. The housing portion of the project is all affordable, with half of the units restricted for residents over the age of 62. The rest of the units will not be age restricted. The project will include services for residents, and those services will be offered by a local service provider. The goal of the project is to promote intergenerational living and stronger communities. The project team is requesting funding for financial analysis, developing a stormwater management plan, architectural design, and community engagement. The developer for this project has also been a participant in the Minneapolis DTAP program. St. Louis Park is requesting funding in support of an affordable commercial development. The project will develop 4 to 7 units that will be condominiumized and sold at affordable price points to local business owners. The majority of the business owners that the developer organization, Partnership in Property Commercial Land Trust, works with business owners of color. With this being a land trust model, the PIP CLT will retain ownership of the land underneath the building, but the business owners would own the commercial space. The project team is requesting funding for financial modeling and community engagement. Staff are recommending funding the request at $90,000. The City of St. Paul is requesting $200,000 in funding to support affordable rental ownership housing on the Hams Brewery site. The housing units are designed with family needs in mind. The units are larger, and units include details like space for bulk food storage and large communal gathering spaces. The project is using income averaging to obtain deeply affordable units as part of the project. The team is requesting funding for architectural services, financial modeling, and soil testing. Staff are recommending funding the project at $200,000. And finally, the City of St. Paul is requesting funding for Little Mod, which is a co-living space located near West 7th in St. Paul. The project would feature shared kitchen and communal living spaces with private bedrooms. This is an infill project adding density to an existing developed area. The project has a strong emphasis on environmental sustainability and intends to be a net zero development. The project team is requesting funding for financial analysis. The full request amount is for $100,000, but due to limited funding, the funding recommendation is for $8,600. The project team has indicated that this amount would still be beneficial and has requested that that funding go towards financial analysis. So once again, the action before you today is that the Metropolitan Council awards 6 Livable Communities Act pre-development grants totaling $898,600 and authorize the Executive Director of Community Development to execute the grant agreement on behalf of the council. And with that, I can take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Gary. I do have a couple questions before I turn to the committee members, please. And the first one has to do with what kind of evaluation or what goes into your consideration when you're deciding which projects to award funds to when they have scored in a qualifying way. So there's a handful that we're not funding. So how do we decide that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a great question. So we go down the list of who has scored the highest and award funding based on score until we run out of funding, considering the $300,000 cap that we have per city. So once a city has met their $300,000 cap, we skip over the rest of the projects that are in that city because the city has met their cap regardless of what the score is, and move on to the next highest scoring projects, considering what city those projects are in.
Great, thanks, that's very helpful. And then the other one is sort of related to that, and that's this little mod project, which looks very interesting. And I don't know if committee members know more about it. I don't. This is my introduction to it. But we're awarding them something, which is better than nothing. It's far from what they requested. And when we do have a remaining balance within this account, what consideration went into reducing the award to the level that we have?
Yes, Mr. Chair, another great question. So the policy development program shares funds with the pre-development program. So the funds, consideration of the funds included both of those programs. So we were also considering the request that came in from the policy development program. So there's not a very clear way to present that in the business item, which is something that we're looking at for next year. But that was part of the consideration of what policy applications did we have coming in, what was the request, and the pre-development, the amount available to pre-development was lowered than considering the request that we had coming in from the policy program.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Other questions from committee members? Yeah, Councilmember Bento and then Councilmember Carter.
I know I've asked and others have asked this question before, but I think I pretty much know the answer, but I'm going to ask it again just for the purpose of clarity in today's conversation. My old district included Little Canada, and I believe this is the second or third time they've applied, and they have yet to be successful, if I'm understanding their history correctly. And one of my last meetings with the Little Canada folks, we had a conversation about what they're trying to do along Rice Street, and they're working really hard on that. And because their community development director is a former CDC staffer and my former sector rep who taught me a lot when I first came on the council, I'm very partial, even though Little Canada is no longer in my district. I'm wondering, what can we as committee members and what can staff do to help smaller communities get to the table successfully and be able to walk away with at least some funding to help them with their projects?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bento. One thing that I'm hearing from smaller cities is that there's a need for small area planning funds. Mm-hmm. There's a need for kind of that stage in between policy and pre-development. So you might have an area identified, it's not specific enough to qualify for pre-development, because for pre-development, we do require that there is either a specific site identified with a somewhat specific idea of what's going to be on that site, or you have a very specific idea of what project you're going to be putting forward, and you have maybe 2 or 3 sites that you're looking at. So in the case of the Little Canada project, we didn't have enough information in the application to be able to score compared to other applications. So one of the things that we're talking about as a team is looking at how can we support cities throughout the full continuum of development, really looking from policy to occupancy for projects. So that will be part of the conversation that we're having in supporting smaller communities that might not have the resources to be able to do more area planning, like in the case of the Rice Street developments.
Thank you. Councilmember Carter, then Councilmember Chambliss. Councilmember Carter.
Questions that I would have asked have been asked, and we're all thinking much the same thing around this. But I do want to compliment the work that has been done, in particular, the creativity around designing new spaces for living styles that are diverse across the board, and also the combination of affordability for residents as well as affordability for businesses. I also would like to know how many awards or how many applications were received?
Yes,
Gary.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Carter, we received 12 applications.
12.
This round, yes.
All right. Well, it is really good to see these applications coming in, and thank you for the work and parsing through and working with others to determine the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. I have a few questions, Chair
Please.
and Hannah. One, I'm not sure if I've lost track, but the travel demand management plan, can you speak to how that is going to be incorporated into one of the applications? And then I have some other questions.
Ms. Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Chambliss. I will have to look back at which application is requesting funding for travel demand management plan.
Okay,
I apologize.
I thought it was
The
St.
Unity
Paul,
building.
but we can come back to that one.
It's the Minneapolis Unity Building? Yeah.
The Minneapolis Unity? Okay.
Was it the Unity building?
Yes.
Okay. I apologize. At a certain point, the requested activities kind of blend together if I don't have a list in front
No
of me.
worries.
So a travel demand management plan is typically created to understand either alternative means of transportation or looking at what transportation options might be if there are times that you have heavier traffic in the area. So getting an understanding of how they will contend with either surges in traffic or having alternative means of transportation. And if there is someone from the project team that would like to give more detail to that question, I could ask if they could come and provide more detail on that.
So, Chair,
Councilmember Chambliss.
I would take it there might be a need or an issue in that particular area that needs to be addressed. Okay.
Yes.
And then the other question is regarding the Fridley application. That's for
That's
the other
policy.
item, sorry. So the other question is regarding the building on Stewart Avenue. And the communal living aspect of it. I'm very familiar with that area. It's very beautiful. I lived within blocks of that area before moving to the area I'm at now. So it would seem that would be another option for flexible living. Can you elaborate on who would benefit from communal living situations?
Ms. Gary.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Chambliss. I think there are a lot of different situations in which someone would benefit from a communal living situation. If you have folks who are younger and maybe not fully established in living on their own, might want to still have more of a roommate situation. It's a great option to be able to have the privacy of having your own bedroom, but then have shared space with others. And I think another option would be folks who are older and might not have family around close who still want to be in community, living in community without having to I guess, to try to find a roommate situation to set that up. So it's a more intentional way to foster community and communal living through having a shared living space.
Well,
Councilmember Janice.
just a comment, I think that's just a wonderful idea. I hope we can find more opportunities like that, and to have a building be designed for that purpose. That's a good model to follow, I would think. Thank you.
Agreed, thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom, then Councilmember Johnson. Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Going back to the project, is it called Little Mod? Is that right? Yeah, that got 8,000 after recommending 100, or after going after 100,000. Are they able to do, obviously not what they were hoping to do, but there must be some minimum that where they just can't really do really any sort of pre-development. And I'm curious to know, do they have enough, is $8,000 enough for them to do anything that they were hoping to do? And then I have a follow-up, please.
Ms. Gary.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lindstrom, I don't know all of the details of the financing for this project. Before making the recommendation, I did check in with the project team to see if this would still be a usable amount. Did they want to receive this amount of money? And they indicated that it would still be useful. But I can get more information on the
That's
detailed
okay.
finances.
Yeah, you looked into it, they can use it, that's good enough for me. I just don't want any money sitting on the table. And a follow-up, if I could, Mr. Chair, we made a change for this year about how in some cases, I think it is like 50% of the funding could be used upfront in some cases. And I'm curious to know, since this is a new change for this year, was that a successful change or not so much, or to be determined?
Ms. Gary.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lindstrom, it's to be determined. We haven't had any cities structure the grant that way yet. I think we're still working with cities on how to best approach that on their end. It's something that we've heard a lot from developers, that the strict reimbursement basis is a challenge because you're required to have that capital upfront or required to have your subcontractors wait to get funding. There were a couple of cities that were already structuring their grants that way. So it's in process. We have the option available now. We haven't had cities specifically request that they wanted the grant structured that way. So it's part of our ongoing work with cities to try to find a good middle ground for what works with the city and their finances and what's reduces barriers for developers coming in.
Perfect, thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Johnson, then Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of points on the development that is in St. Louis Park. Super interested in this because it's around wealth building, and I think that's super important too for community to be able to get in and own, and of course with the right structure and support so that it's feasible for not only the whole project but for what would be the individual owners. So I'm interested on the backside of this and seeing under the grant activity, the deliverable is the final financial model for condominium business spaces under the land trust partner that they're working with. Because it'll be interesting to see under the land trust model, which helps to buy down, but then, you know, where that wealth building can actually take place if they decide to sell one day. So really excited about that. And I'm just going to throw something general. It doesn't have to be, you know, coming out of the management committee, we're always looking at, you know, what all of the services that we contract with, making sure that we're doing business with minority-based businesses, DBE, MCUBs. And, you know, we probably ask this every now and then, but I'm just hoping that, you know, this grant money that's going into these, the pre-development project work, hopefully there are also, you know, the contractors that they'll be hiring, facilitators and so on that will be tapping into community as well, so that the grant dollars are flowing and helping to, whether we might be tracking them or not, helping to facilitate the growth in minority-owned businesses.
Ms. Gary.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, I think that's a great comment, and we consider that as, when we're looking in the applications, especially representation of the project team for the community that the project is intending to serve. And that can mean a lot of things. So we're looking at how the team has come together to best meet those needs. And the part about that being a wealth building strategy is something that we are considering as well with where the money from the grant is actually going.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Several of these have previous Livable Communities funds that they have received. The St. Louis Park one previously received 109,000, and it looks like it's a pretty small site. Is that for the exact same parcel, or is that adjacent, and what were they using the previous one for?
Ms. Gary.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Wolf. It is for the same project, and they applied in the first round, did not get a full award, and applied again to the second round for different activities. So when we're assessing applications coming in again, if the application is requesting funding for different activities, or they got a partial award, we consider it to be a different application rather than a repeat application.
How, can I continue?
Please.
How about the one in Brooklyn Center that got 2 million? Is that a different part of the same development, or is that for the same spot?
So it's on the same site. It's a very large site. It's 80 acres, I believe, for the opportunity site. So they are coming in different phases. This project did receive a TOD grant last year for the same part of the project. But there are different elements that are included in this portion of the project that were not also included in that TOD portion of the project.
Councilmember Wolf.
Yeah, if I could follow up, that seems sort of odd to get a development grant and then turn around and get another pre-development grant, because typically when you get a development grant, you're ready to go. So I guess I don't quite understand.
We see, I wouldn't say it's common that we have applicants come in for development and then do pre-development, but we do see that occasionally, and a lot of that is very dependent on where the project team is with their development timeline. I would have to check back on exactly what they were requesting funding for, but if it is something like acquisition, we would often see acquisition come in very early, potentially even before you're doing some of that pre-development work. And for architectural services, if you're finalizing those architectural services, you might need to go ahead and start doing some of the things that were in the development stage, like site prep, again, acquisition. I don't know the specifics, so I can check on that and let you know exactly what they were awarded funding for that TOD grant.
Thank you, that would be helpful. With the limited amount of funds, seeing things go to the same projects, it doesn't seem kind of fair in terms of spreading opportunity. And on that note, you had mentioned about the distribution of projects. One of the things that we could look at is a smaller limit per community so that more communities can get funded. Because here we only had 5 communities, well, 6 apply with Little Canada, but 5 made it a high enough score to get funded, but South St. Paul didn't get anything. And we ended up with all of the funding going to St. Paul and Hennepin County and not to the rest of the region. So maybe looking at a smaller amount per community might be a worthwhile thing to consider for the future.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, I think those were some really good questions from Councilmember Wolf. I would like to, I know we get updates on a regular basis on the grants and what happens with them. I think it's important to look at the trends and what's happening as a whole versus in one application time period, because that'll give us a better picture of what's actually happening and how many cities are benefiting. So if we were going to provide information back, I'd like to see it over several application periods, potentially a year, or even looking at what happened the prior year.
Ms. Gary, did you want to comment?
Sure. Chair Lilligren, Councilmember Chambliss, that is data that we have that we're planning on presenting at the October 2nd conversation. So we'll be able to have a more in-depth conversation about that when we do the second part of the conversation that we had on July 17th.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilmember Wolf, for pointing out the South St. Paul, which is part of my new district. I would appreciate some background information on that, Hannah, when you have a chance, just to know more about it, so that I can talk to the city about it and see if there's anything I can do to help them. I know that there's a lot of work going on in South St. Paul. I get through that part of the East Metro area fairly often. So I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion? Further discussion? Director Barajas.
I just would like to make a quick correction. Our title on this business item says round 1, and Mr. Chair, you are indeed correct. It is round 2 of our grant applications. It's referenced in the report, and we just didn't catch it. I apologize for that.
I was paying attention.
You were paying
Yes,
attention.
Thank you, all right.
Pass the test.
All right. Thank you for that correction, Director Barajas. Seeing no further discussion, Ms. Gary has brought forth a recommendation for the round 2 funding of the Livable Communities Act pre-development grants totaling $898,600, and also to authorize the Executive Director of Community Development to execute grant agreements on our behalf. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Councilmember Chambliss. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Carter. Discussion on the motion, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to some of the discussion here as well, if it is possible, and staff can mull it over to think about next year, about breaking it down into smaller pieces, just will you help us track that? I mean, I think Councilmember Wolf and some of us will remember, but it'd be nice to have some of that land on a work plan too, so we know in maybe Q1 or Q2 or wherever it might go. Because I think that's real worthy of some discussion and just helping us to make sure we don't lose sight of that.
Great, thanks. And Director Barajas was nodding to that. And Ms. Gary, didn't you say that it's teed up for a conversation in October?
The data around which cities are getting what amount of
Okay,
funding, we do
all right.
have ready for October.
So we'll put a pin in and make sure that we bring forward the idea of changing the size of the allocations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion? Further discussion? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Ms. Gary, and I know you're not going far because you are leading the next, or presenting on the next non-consent business item, which is item 2023-207. It's the funding recommendations for the 2023 Livable Communities Act Policy Development Grants. Ms. Gary.
Should I introduce myself?
I think we know who you are. We're well acquainted.
Still Miss Gary?
Still me.
Unless something's changed since the last time. All right.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. These are the recommendations coming forward for round 2 of the policy development program. And again, I would like to recognize that we do have cities here in the audience who represent cities that are being recommended for funding today. The Livable Communities Act has several goals that are shared across all of its funding programs. I went over the goals in the previous slide, so I won't go into all of the goals again. Our goals are still the same as they were in pre-development. This is the second year that the policy development program has been available, and the new policy development program supports locally adopted policies that have an impact on physical development in the city. And this is part of our effort to support more cities at a variety of stages and in multiple ways. So as part of that fund distribution plan that was adopted in February of 2023, the council approved up to $2 million for LCA pre-development grants to be awarded in 2 application rounds. And again, the policy developments are included in the pre-development funding. On July 21st, we received 3 policy development applications for round 2 of the policy development funding opportunity, and these applications were reviewed by an interdisciplinary team of council staff. So applications are scored on the same 3 evaluation criteria that we had for pre-development, but we're looking at them in a different way since this is for policy. So for outcomes, we're looking at how well the policy outcomes will align with council goals. For the process, we are looking at how the city is analyzing and thinking about the impact that the policy will have. And for the team, we're looking at either the scope of work that the city has developed with a consultant or the criteria that the city will be using to select the consultant that they'll be working with. So the scoring process has yielded a staff recommendation for the 2023 policy development funding opportunity. The recommendation before you today is that the Metropolitan Council award 3 Livable Communities Act policy development grants totaling $101,400. So this is a summary of the applications that are being recommended for funding. Again, the funding for the policy development program is shared with the funding for pre-development. So funding for these 3 policy applications reaches us at a total of $101,400 for policy, which leaves a remaining $898,600 for pre-development applications. And I'm now going to go do a brief overview of the policies that are being recommended today. The City of Chaska is looking to update their zoning code to reduce parking requirements, right-sized landscaping for more pedestrian-friendly environments, and to reduce impermeable surfaces in the city. The desire for this zoning change came from several affordable housing developments having to go through additional steps for approval. Updating the city's zoning code will allow future similar projects to be allowed by right. This will also help to support the city's goal of creating more housing options for residents. The city is requesting $50,000 to work with a consultant on developing the new code. The City of Fridley is proposing an update to their zoning code to decrease parking minimums for multifamily and industrial projects. In addition to this, they're looking to create incentives for developers to include more active transportation options and set standards for active transportation inclusion in new developments. The update will also set expectations for use for resilient and diverse landscaping materials. The city is requesting $15,000 to work with a consultant to develop these updates. And finally, New Brighton is seeking $36,400 to create their accessory dwelling unit or ADU policy. The need for this policy came out of a 2022 housing study that the city commissioned to support ADUs, and this had unanimous city council support.
That was an easy one to catch. It says Fridley on your slide.
Yeah, so sorry. So these ADUs will provide additional housing options, including aging in place, options for older residents. Staff are recommending funding this request at $36,400 to work with a consultant on developing the policy.
That's really exciting.
So once again, the action before you today is that the Metropolitan Council award 3 Livable Communities Act policy development grants totaling $101,400. And with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gary. Questions on that report, Councilmember Chambliss?
Well, thank you. These are very interesting requests, 2 of them related to parking. So I'd like to dig into what some of the parking issues and barriers and motivations for reducing parking, both on-street and off-street, for those 2 requests.
Ms. Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Chambliss. If there are representatives from any of the cities who would like to come and give more detail on that, otherwise I can ask for more detail and follow up with you on how the more of the background of what specific issues they're having with parking.
So that would be the cities of Chaska and Fridley, correct? Mm-hmm. Anyone from either of those communities here? Would you care to step forward and maybe address Councilmember Chambliss's question? Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chair and Council. My name is Nancy Apps. I'm the Associate Planner for the City of Fridley. I can speak for our community as primarily a post-war 1960s era development. A lot of our zoning code hasn't been touched since it was originally adopted. And so we find that there are developments with a lot more parking than one might think they need. At the same time, we have a very concerned and interested body of policymakers who want to make sure that if we change the requirements, we do it right. So we're requesting funding today to spend some time researching what the best practice is for off-street parking in 2023 and going forward.
All right, thanks, Ms. Apps. Councilmember Chambliss?
Yes, and part of the reason I'm interested in that research is because I know some groups are interested in reducing parking to encourage more pedestrian and well-being with walking or for environmental reasons. But I do also know that if a family is in a multifamily housing development or a unit, many times they have restricted parking and they have issues with towing and family members and visitors. And sometimes the on-street parking is restricted, and that makes it even more complicated. So that's, those can pose barriers for residents. So to see the whole picture in terms of the research, I think would be helpful for policymaking decisions.
Here. Thank you. Councilmember Wolf, did you have a question for Ms. Asp?
Well, I was just going to follow up on what Councilmember Chambliss was saying, as somebody who's dealt with some of that snow storage and plowing. Because people tend to forget that we have winter here when they're planning for parking. It's good to have the right amount of parking, but you need to have enough that you can deal with winter as well. I have other comments also. But.
I think any other questions from our guest for the Ms. Asp, is that correct?
Apps.
Apps, thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Apps? All right, thank you so much for sharing information. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to see a different mix of communities applied for these and are successful. Chaska has certainly had grants in the past, and I think Fridley might have had one or two, but I don't remember seeing New Brighton in the past. So that's good that we're getting some geographic variety in our applications. Other than that, I think it looks great. I mean, the challenge with the accessory dwelling units is always cost. Even if you make the rules okay, they end up costing a lot more than what people think they're going to have. But if they want to try to look at that, that's great.
Agree. Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, I think the accessory dwelling unit, ADU, application is very interesting. I would be interested in knowing, how fast are ADUs growing? How is that impacting the housing shortage? And what cities are taking advantage of them and the pace at which cities are taking advantage, because I know that they're becoming a lot more popular. So it would be very interesting to see where that goes and how that's impacting our region and how many cities are taking advantage of it and who's taking advantage of it the most.
Right, and so I'm looking at Ms. Gary and Director Barajas. It seems like they're responding, and so you'll get that info to us.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilmember, I think this is really great, kind of that core information that we would be bringing to you as part of our housing policy conversation too, just kind of state of housing in the region, new tools that different cities are using, how they are distributed, just to have sort of that baseline set of then now where do we go from here on addressing issues.
Thank you.
Further comment? I just wanted to comment and really commend all of the cities that we're awarding to for doing this policy work. These are important issues. It's a great observation, Councilmember Chambliss, that two of them deal with parking and how we can right-size that. I really appreciate Ms. Apps and her response about what Fridley is doing. And I was just thinking back during my time on Minneapolis City Council, I had the honor to represent Eat Street in the neighborhood of Whittier. And there were already several zoning type overlays to kind of tweak. And with the support of the residents and businesses in the community, we overlaid commercial parking requirement down to 0. And I was really surprised that the community would support it, but they saw what the options were. Their communities would just become parking lots, more parking lots than businesses really, or find something else, and they were willing to support it. So hats off to you and Fridley. These older, fully built communities need to find other solutions, and the accessory dwelling units as well. I mean, that's multiplying occupancy, and I look forward to getting the information back about how they're being used. Any other discussion? Yeah, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, so did this second round bring us up to the $1 million available?
That's it exactly right now, yeah, now that I've seen the total.
I just want to make sure, because I'm like, oh, that's interesting, right? But I was figuring that's part of it. And these were the only 3 then that applied?
Yes.
Okay.
And this is the first round of this, it's a new program, right?
Mr.
Ms.
Chair,
Gary.
we did have a round last year and awarded 2 policy development
Okay.
grants. It was only offered during the second round
Okay.
of the pre-development policy development funding. And we had another round earlier this year and did not receive any applications for
Okay.
policy. So we got 3 applications.
All right, interesting, and sort of building on Councilmember Chambliss's request, I mean, it'd be interesting to know what impact these policies are having, since this is sort of a new approach. And as Councilmember Wolf pointed out, supporting sort of untraditional communities or communities that aren't usually participating in the Livable Communities account funds. Very cool. Any other discussion? Otherwise, Ms. Gary has brought forward a recommendation that we award 3 Livable Communities Act policy development grants totaling $101,400. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? That carries. And I'm sorry, before we move on, as Ms. Gary pointed out, several communities were represented. Ms. Apps, we got to meet you. Thank you so much. From Philly, if there are other communities that are here representing or in support of their applications, I would invite you to come up and introduce yourselves if you're here, anyone, and yeah, maybe just tell us your community and your project, please, and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Ben Gazzola with the City of New Brighton, and we greatly appreciate you approving this grant here tonight. I can tell you our city council is enthusiastic on increasing housing within the city. It's been one of their primary goals, so the fact that this was out there as an option to help us get to that goal was fantastic. So that's why I'm here in support of this application.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for your work and thanks for being here. Sir.
Hi,
Hello.
I am Sam Owens, Investoration Real Estate and Development with the City of Minneapolis. My project is the Cora in the Southeast Como neighborhood, Ward 1.
Great.
Yeah, I was part of the DTAP program. Definitely appreciate being able to have this be my first development and yeah, to just be able to support.
Congratulations.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Thanks for your good work. Hello, friend.
Hi, greetings, Felicia Perry. I'm actually here with, on behalf of the St. Louis Park Project with Partnership in Property Commercial Land Trust. We're really excited about this project. We actually have a second cohort of workshop participants coming through PIP CLT, excited to see this project come forward as a potential commercial space for their business. So thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Berry. Thanks for being here. Thanks for all your excellent work. Great. Please.
Good afternoon. I'm Erica Bird with the City of St. Paul, and I'm here to represent the HAMS redevelopment project, and we're so grateful for your support, both in this application and some prior applications. It's a large site with both new construction on an empty parking lot and adaptive reuse, and so we appreciate your ongoing support of the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your work. Anyone else? Great.
Well, to our partners.
Yeah, very nice. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, Ms. Gary, for your work on this. Incredible. It's always nice to give money away. So we'll move on to our information items. We have 2. The first is our Regional Parks and Trails Systems 2024 Competitive Equity Grant Program Draft Notice of Funding Availability. And we will have Jessica Lee present. Ms. Lee, thanks for being here.
Good afternoon, Chair and council members. My name is Jessica Lee, and I'm a parks planner the council. And I'm here to share with you the 2024 Competitive Equity Grant Program Draft Notice of Funding Availability for the Regional Parks and Trail System. So just as a reminder, the Equity Grant Program provides funding to our parks implementing agencies for projects that advance equitable use of our system. And they must focus on one of 6 focus areas: race, ethnicity, income, ability, age, or national origin. And we highly encourage agencies to focus on more than one, and applications that incorporate multiple areas tend to score a lot higher. Some background, this program started in 2019 with a pilot program and just $300,000. We received, I think, around 15 applications that year for $1.5 million, and we were able to only fund 3 of them. And that was just with capital funding. But that demonstrated a greater need, and so a couple years later, we were able to dedicate $2 million to the program, and in 2021, we funded 23 projects, which were a mix of both capital and non-capital or programming projects. So rather than say what kind of projects are eligible, we like to keep it open and encourage creativity. And so I just wanted to give an example of some previously funded projects. In our last round, we funded a Parks on the Go outreach vehicle to Washington County, a BIPOC ambassador program for St. Paul, multicultural, multilingual advertising in Minneapolis, a brand-new mental health and wellness-based programming for Scott County, a cultural liaison for Ramsey County, and an augmented reality trail program for Anoka County. And this is just a sampling in no particular order. We were able to fund each agency in the last round.
Each of the 10?
Each of the 10, yes.
Great, thank you.
So for the 2024 grant round, we have about the same amount of funding as last time. We have $658,000 in council bonds, and this is available for capital projects only. Once again, we have $1.4 million in parks interest earnings, and this is prioritized for programming and non-capital projects, and if funds remained after awarding those projects, then we can use those for capital as well. Agencies are limited to $200,000 in each category for a total of $400,000, and the grant requests can be between $20,000 and $200,000. And they can apply for as many as they want, but they can only receive up to $400,000. So here's a snapshot of our evaluation criteria. This is also on the last page of the draft NOFA, which is in your info item. We did not change much from last year, but after presenting to our Parks and Open Space Commission, we did add one thing under the community engagement to encourage awareness building among underserved communities. And after sharing this with our implementing agencies, our partners, we did change slightly the programming initiatives to be more inclusive of other staff besides outreach staff, because not all agencies have outreach staff, but we want them to be able to demonstrate how they're working together within their agency to develop these projects. But otherwise, we found the criteria worked pretty well last time, and so we didn't mess with it too much. Our anticipated timeline for the next grant round, this is the last info item we're bringing to our partners in the council. And so after this, we'll put together a business item and bring that in October. Once that's approved, we will open the application of web grants and post the NOFA and take projects. Those will probably be due December 15th, and then council staff will start the review. And we're hoping to meet with our technical review team in February. And this is where I make a pitch to you all. We would like up to 3 Community Development Council members to serve on that committee. And if you are interested, please talk to your chair, and we'll coordinate that.
We have one taker already. Oh, there we go, we filled it out.
Wonderful.
Councilmembers Lindstrom, Wolf, and Vento will be participating.
That's great. We also have representation from our agencies as well as our Parks Commission, and possibly our Equity Advisory Committee as well.
Great.
So we'll be meeting in February probably for that, and then we'll develop the final funding recommendations and bring that to the council in April with hopes that the grant agreements will go out in May, which works really well because the current grants expire at the end of June. And so this will allow the agencies to continue with their great work without having any kind of break. And that's all I have, but I'm happy to take questions or comments.
I'm sure there will be some, and I just want to thank you, Ms. Lee, for your work, and to our implementing partners as well, the implementing agencies. And what's kind of cool about this is something that we were able to, most of us on this committee have been part of helping to advocate and advance this equity program, building on the great work of the council that came before us. And so as you saw, we had a very small amount the first year, and it was only a bill for capital. And we very quickly realized that we would need to dedicate funds for programming if we really wanted to start balancing out the demographic of who was using our regional parks. And so data has shown us that some populations are underusing them, and so this is a way of addressing it. It's really exciting to see this new round. Yeah, discussion, Councilmember Wolf, then Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad to hear that it worked good the last time and we don't have to make major changes, but a little bit on the history of that. The interest earnings from the park bonds used to go to North Mississippi Regional Park only.
Interesting.
And we had to get permission from the legislature to stop doing that, because it's like, okay, so how many years do you fund just one park? And the legislature agreed that we could use that for other projects, and then it was the council that decided, that, well, MPOSC and the council then put forward the equity grant program for other things besides capital with that money, after a long discussion with the agencies and others on what would be the fair thing to do.
Thank you for that history, Councilmember Wolf. And so as we're passing through parks funds, they earn interest, right? And it's very discretionary fund. Once we had statutory approval, it was, we can do a lot with them. Did you want to add something,
I'll say that the statute is very general, and it says for the use and betterment of the regional park system. That's
Nice.
how general it is, so there's a lot of discretion here.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom.
I had thanks, Mr. Chair. I had the pleasure of being on the review committee a couple of years ago, so I'm glad I got my hand up really quickly there to make the top three again.
Additive.
And I recall at that time, and you may have mentioned it, that we had almost double the number of requests. I think there was maybe close to 4 million, maybe not quite that, worth of requests for 2 million worth of funds. And I'll just second or third the fact that all 10 implementing agencies found this worthwhile and not only put it forward in an application, but actually were rewarded funds. So that in and of itself tells us a lot about the program, I think. And it's also, I'll just wrap up by saying, it's also fun to go back and then look at those 15 to 20 different projects that were funded and see how they turned out. And there's been plenty of website articles or newspaper articles about these really successful programs.
Well, thank you. Further discussion, questions, suggestions? No? Hearing none, we'll look forward to the notice of funding availability coming forward in October. Thank you, Ms. Lee. Thank you for that. And we will move on to our final information item for the evening. Excuse me. It's the annual Public Housing Agency Plan and discussion of public comments. And Ms. Smith is here. It says Ms. Paulson as well on the agenda, but I'm not seeing her. So you're flying solo tonight?
She is not. I'm flying solo.
Okay, so
One of my first comments is I want to give her credit because much of this work on the PHA plan and this presentation was done by Ms. Paulson and others, and she was unable to be here. So Stephanie, I know you're listening in. I hope I can do you justice tonight. And the other person I want to thank is Steve Victory. He's the business systems analyst in the HRA. We could not do our work without him, and a lot of the data I'm going to provide tonight came from him. So thank you to those two. But good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. As you know, I'm Terri Smith. I'm the director of the Metro HRA, the Council's Housing and Redevelopment Authority. And I'm here tonight to talk about the Public Housing Agency Plan. My goal really for tonight is to have a robust discussion with you all surrounding the annual plan and the public comments that we've received during the public comment period, and really gain some direction going forward for a future action item. So I have quite a few slides and I have a lot of data, so I welcome questions. If you ask a question that I'm gonna answer in a future slide, I may defer just for the sake of time, but
Thanks. So, Ms. Smith, you would like questions as we go, and then if it's answered later, you can just feel free to say that's coming up.
If that
But you
works,
would like-
Mr. Chair.
Works for me.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to provide just a little bit of background, and you've seen this slide numerous times, but I think repeat helps. But as you recall, the Metropolitan Council, HRA, provides housing assistance primarily through the Housing Choice Voucher Program to 7,200 households in the region. The service area here for the Metro HRA is outlined in the map. The Metro HRA serves the areas that are in light yellow. So all of Carver County, all of Anoka County, and then suburban Hennepin and Ramsey County, excluding the areas there that are shown that have their own housing authorities. So we serve about 96 communities in the suburbs with rent assistance. In 2022, we distributed about $78 million in housing assistance payments to 1,400 private landlords in the region. This is the slide you've seen numerous times. We presented at the Committee of the Whole at one of the recent meetings on this process, but as you may recall, the Metro HRA is required by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to submit a public housing agency plan each year. The plan describes the HRA programs, goals, and strategies for meeting needs of low-income residents in the region. You may also recall there's a 5-year plan also that is required every 5th year that is more of a deeper dive and long-range goals for meeting the needs of low-income people in the region. And that was last approved by you all for the years 2020 to 2024. So we'll be engaging with you on that 5-year plan starting next year. As you also will recall, the housing choice or the administrative plan is a detailed policy document that explains all the program day-to-day operational details for program operations. So it includes lots, and we're going to engage on some of this tonight, but includes things like eligibility criteria, when someone's assistance will be denied or terminated, when we will change a participant's rent portion, how rent is calculated, how income changes and household additions are to be reported to the housing authority, how rents are established, and much, much more, including project-based voucher policies. Both the PHA plan and the administrative plan have been posted for public comment since the first part of July, and the public comment period closed August 31st, so just a few days ago. So here's where we're at in the timeline. You'll recall on August 2nd, we presented a Committee of the Whole information item on the PHA plan and the process and dug a little bit into project-based vouchers during that meeting. We had a public hearing on August 21st here at this committee, so for those of you that were here, heard some of our commenters at that meeting. The public comment period closed on August 31st. Today, I'm doing an information item on the PHA plan and digging into some data that relates to the comments received. And we're hoping to come back for final review and approval, your approval on September 18th. If we don't have enough time for the robust discussion we want to have today, we do have time to delay that process by 2 weeks and have another information item before action and still meet our HUD deadlines. But this is the tentative schedule today. So part of the PHA plan process each year is telling HUD and the public and you all as policymakers how we've met some of our goals over the last year that were highlighted in last year's plan. So these are just some of the highlights of the work that's been accomplished over the last year that I thought important to share. So the Metro HRA maintained a 99.7 utilization of all vouchers in 2022. So about as close to 100% as you can get. We're really proud of that, but there's a lot that goes into maintaining that level of utilization. But again, our goal is always to utilize all funds and all vouchers to serve as many families as possible. We were awarded some new foster youth to independence vouchers, so that's a brand new program for us.
I'm sorry,
Partnership.
Ms. Smith,
Yes.
just because you asked for questions as well. that number really is amazing,
Yeah, it is.
99.7% utilization. And so I'm just wondering, what do other PHAs? I know we're bigger than most PHAs, but what's the level of utilization generally?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Minneapolis has different rules, so they don't track utilization by us,
Okay.
so it's not really comparable. St. Paul was below 98%. I don't know exactly what their rate was, but places like Duluth, they're below 80% just because of a housing stock issue up there. So I would say housing authorities all over the state are at different utilization levels. But this is hard to achieve.
Yeah, great work. I mean, I can't imagine how much work goes into maintaining that level of utilization. Councilmember Carter.
Yes, thank you. That is very impressive. And I wonder about the definition of that utilization. Does that mean someone is using all of those vouchers, 99.7% of the 7,200 at all times during the year? Or is there a more refined definition?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Carter, it's about who we're paying on. So if we pay subsidy for a month on somebody, that's a utilized voucher. So we have, 7,200 times 12 unit months to pay on, and we've paid 99.7% on those vouchers. So there's very few unused vouchers. It's essentially full utilization.
Thank you.
Just to give a little more context, HUD requires housing authorities to be at 98% of utilized vouchers or 98% of funds used in order to be considered a high performer, their highest ranking, and we met near 100% on both. So
Great
we're
work.
proud of that, yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Smith.
Okay, so foster youth to independence program vouchers, these are vouchers that serve young people that are aging out of foster care, and we provide rent assistance, and that have been involved somewhat in the child protection system, and it's a partnership with the county continuums of care. We are awarded additional veterans vouchers, so we just received 30 new veterans vouchers. We launched the Community Choice Demonstration Program, and as you will recall, that's a federal program. We were one of 9 sites across the country awarded funds for a mobility demonstration program, working with families with children and moving to low poverty areas, and then providing supports to some of those families to ensure success as they move to new neighborhoods.
Ms. Smith, can I ask kind of a, this, I think I know the answer, but just so you talked about the foster youth to independence programs, and that is through the county's continuum of care entry point. And is that exclusively within our HRA area, or is that all the counties in the metro?
Mr. Chair, that's a good question. We have partnerships with 3 counties on that program, Hennepin, Ramsey, and Anoka.
Okay.
And we work with the public welfare child agencies in each of those counties on that program for referral.
Okay, so it's a little different from the boundaries of our HRA then, correct? Because St. Paul has an HRA, right, so.
Correct. Mr. Chair, St. Paul has a foster youth to independence program, so does Minneapolis, and a few of the smaller agencies do as well.
Okay.
But if the young people are interested in moving out of our service area, we will transfer them to another service area through the portability provision.
Thank you, it's good to know that. Councilmember Carter, did you have a question?
Yes. So you asked for it, you got it. The question.
Right, maybe that was a mistake.
You have said that we have the 99% utilization. We all say that's so impressive. Especially, that means that somebody is always waiting to pop into a use of a voucher. Can you tell me about that waiting list, what that looks like?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'll defer that question because I have several slides that get at that and surrounding issues, so I'll defer that question if I may.
Good.
Anything else right now? Ms. Smith?
Okay, received 218 emergency housing vouchers. We've talked to you about those. Those are, were awarded during the period of the pandemic, but sunset as of 9/30/2023. So we have, if a voucher has never been issued, we can continue to issue those vouchers, but once they sunset on November 30 or September 30th of this year. So if a family goes off the program, we cannot reissue that voucher. But we're happy to say we expect full utilization by the end of this month on those vouchers. And I think the national average on utilization is like 74%. So we're in good shape with those.
We'll have 100%, right?
And I think it's because we're so connected in our region with our continuums of care. And we have MOUs with SMAC, which is the Suburban Metro Area Continuum of Care that covers Anoka and Carver counties, and then Ramsey and Hennepin counties for those programs and those vouchers.
Yeah, Councilmember Chambliss.
I'm sure you've talked about the continuum of care that happens after the first emergency housing voucher. Can you explain how that process works in terms of support to help them maintain stable housing?
Ms. Smith?
Yes, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, these are the first vouchers we've ever received, that came with service dollars, so that we have some money to provide supports for the families that are utilizing them, such as security deposits, moving expenses. HUD just came out with a new notice on Friday that expanded the use of those service dollars to include tenancy support, someone's in housing. So if somebody's in housing and they want to move and they have rent arrears or utility arrears in a previous unit, we can pay those expenses for them so they can remain housed. So that's an exciting thing with those programs. The referrals must come through coordinated entry, which is a coordinated system of referral for people experiencing homelessness to housing and services. So the people with the highest need are served first with these vouchers. And then there are supports required for these vouchers, like housing search assistance through the county's and case management system, that help them get their voucher placed, but then also provide supports once they're in housing.
Yeah, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, just one more question. Is this only for displaced housing, or would it help a person who wants to maintain their existing housing, or if they find a place that they want to stay at? Does it help, or are there other programs to help people protect their housing?
Councilmember Lilligren, this is, someone has to be homeless in order to get one of these vouchers. And there are a variety of programs available for families, and I certainly don't know all of them, but I mean, I think there could be some reprioritization even at the federal level for people to, as homeless prevention instead of when somebody's homeless. But I know some of the new state dollars that passed are for some prevention programs, but I don't think we have time to get into that today.
That's a good question. It's complicated.
Yes.
Thanks. Ms. Smith?
So we offered 40 project-based vouchers to serve veterans and people experiencing homelessness this year. We made preliminary awards of those vouchers, and now we'll wait and see if projects get funded, and then projects that get funded will come back to you for approval later in the year, and I'm going to talk more about that later in the presentation. And then you know about the expanded Homework Starts with Home program from Stephanie's presentation at the last meeting about expanding to Anoka County, and this is a program that works with students and their families experiencing homelessness with rent assistance and supports to keep them in place and help keep them in their school district to maintain stability. So we have a few proposed administrative plan updates that are coming before you, and they're redlined in the document that's online right now. They're pretty minimal, but I think this first one is important because our goal is always to screen tenants into the voucher program and not out. So we've revised, made a proposed revision. The current policy states that rent assistance participants be denied admission or terminated from the program for criminal or drug-related convictions without specifying the level of conviction. The proposal is that we add felony level convictions, so we're not denying people or terminating people that have, for example, minor misdemeanor drug records. So we'll be screening those folks in instead of out. Their language remains in the plan that Metro HRA will continue to consider records of conviction or other credible evidence, but will no longer blanketly deny or terminate assistance for those misdemeanor, for example, drug-related offenses. You all know that there's a state law that passed the cannabis use in the 2023 legislative session, but the use of cannabis remains illegal at the federal level because it's illegal federally. So as long as somebody's living in federally subsidized housing, it remains illegal, even though it's legal at the state. And so we're in the process of notifying all voucher holders of that rule. We made some other minor changes to the administrative plan just to provide clarity or update regulation sightings, which are pretty minor. And then we added a new special purpose voucher, Chapter 19. Thank you, Stephanie, but it provides information on all these special purpose vouchers that we have all in one place instead of scattered throughout the plan, just to make it more clear. And we received some clarification on the emergency housing voucher program on Friday that we added to that chapter today. So it's still during the public comment period, but it just includes those expanded use of service dollars. So it's really a good thing for the people that we're serving. So who do the programs serve? This is at a national level. So the Housing Choice and Project-Based Voucher programs provide rent assistance to 2.3 million low-income families, and that's 5 million people at a federal level, and there's still an extreme shortage. In terms of the project-based voucher program, there are 450,000 families, or 20% of vouchers, nationally utilizing that program, and 1.85 million people on the households on the Housing Choice Voucher Program. So 80% are tenant-based vouchers and 20% are project-based vouchers. 60%, I think the other thing I'd like to say on that is public housing is the other big third form of federal rent assistance. And public housing, of course, stays with the unit, similar to the project-based program, that someone moves in and the assistance is tied to a unit. 60% of all medium and large public housing authorities, sorry for the PHA acronym, Public Housing Authority, that's us, which administer 92% of the vouchers use PBVs. And that statement is kind of confusing, but what that's telling us conversely is that 40% of the medium and large housing authorities across the country do not have PBV programs. And that includes some here in our region. The large ones do have PBV programs, but some of the small ones don't.
Questions? First, Councilmember Johnson, then Councilmember Bento. Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, Terry, do we know why they don't use them?
Ms. Smith?
Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Johnson, I think, and I'm going to get into some of this, but it's a heavy lift. There's a lot of staffing capacity, and they require so many more things than housing choice vouchers, and I think housing authorities just don't have the capacity. You don't get paid anymore to administer project-based vouchers, and they take a whole lot more.
Excuse me.
So that's the primary reason.
And Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
just
Councilmember.
one more, and I think it was a slide or two before, but, and maybe it's later in your presentation, but the new money that's coming from the legislature, is that part of the special project vouchers? Will that all be included on that page too, once we figure out, or maybe we have figured out since we've last talked about this, what that would mean? Would that be incorporated into whatever impacts will be to this program?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to talk about that program
Okay,
later.
thank you.
So
Thank
I'll
you.
defer that question, please.
And Councilmember Bento?
I'm gonna wait.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Smith?
Okay, I'm going to share now some slides on the project-based voucher versus tenant-based voucher, and I know many of you are well-versed in this, but I think just for context, it's helpful to start out with, some of the basics on this. But as you know, housing choice vouchers are attached to a household or a person. They move from place to place, unit to unit, renting from a private landlord that's willing to accept the voucher. Acceptance of the voucher remains voluntary on the part of the landlord. So landlords could say, I'm out, I'm not taking it. The choice component of the housing choice voucher comes in here because families choose where they want to live. Finding a unit can be challenging, especially in a market that's low vacancy. If somebody has some challenges in their background, it can be very difficult to find a unit or a landlord willing to participate. We're doing some things with our outreach team and providing housing search assistance, which I'll talk about in a little bit, that we know is helpful when helping voucher families find units to place their voucher. They serve the waiting list, so we have a lengthy waiting list, which I'll talk about. The housing choice vouchers serve people that are on the waiting list. And they naturally serve the lowest income households. So we're naturally meeting, HUD requires that 75% of our program serves people at or below 30% of area median income. We do today, and we have always naturally met that the voucher program serves extremely low income families. On the project-based voucher side, the biggest difference, of course, is that it's attached to a unit and not a person. So a family moves in, they receive assistance, they move out, a new family moves in and receives assistance in that unit. Once a tenant lives in a project-based unit for 1 year, they can call Metro HRA's, their coordinator, and say, I'd like a tenant-based voucher. If we have them, most times we do, can I get a tenant-based voucher to move to a location of my choice? And so we give them a tenant-based voucher. They move on with continued assistance, and we refill that unit. I need my glasses. So horrible. I'm not used to this. My type is too small on here. Improved access to supportive services is an important thing to point out, particularly in 2020 when you all adopted a policy to give PBV developments that have supportive services attached to them get the highest points. So the most recent awards have been supportive service developments. Those do not serve the waiting list, so I think that's important to point out, and I'm going to talk about that in generally don't serve the waiting list. I'm going to talk about that in a few slides. But the tenants lose the choice component, at least when they initially move in, because people are offered the unit that's available. If that unit's in Waconia, that's what they're offered. If that unit's in Roseville, that's what they're offered. So the choice component is lost with the project-based vouchers. And then the project-based vouchers.
I'm sorry, question from Councilmember
Oh,
Johnson?
yes.
Just briefly, can they pass and let somebody go ahead of them and retain their spot for that?
Yes,
for-
absolutely.
For that project-based voucher?
Councilmember Lilligren, yes, and I'll talk about that in a few slides.
Thank you.
And they can assist developers, and you've heard this from a developer group, they can assist in getting additional funding points for other public financing. So developers that have even a loose commitment of project-based vouchers can get points on their funding application for things like tax credits. So that's an important thing to point out. These are the demographics between the project-based voucher and housing choice voucher program. So on the left are the housing choice voucher demographics, and on the right are the project-based voucher. And these are people that are currently using these programs right now. So you can see people of color are utilizing tenant-based vouchers at a higher rate than the project-based vouchers. I'm not sure what that means, but there's a difference in the demographics. So 66% of housing choice voucher folks are Black, and conversely, with the project-based voucher program, 44% of the participants are Black. And so is it where the projects are located? Is it the units that are available? Is it the services that are offered? We don't know exactly why that is, but there is a difference in that, and I just think important to point out.
Thank you. A question from Councilmember Johnson.
Yes, again, briefly, is there a way to dig deeper into the data and disaggregate and understand that?
Ms. Smith.
Councilmember Lilligren, I'm not exactly sure. We know there's a difference. I think we're doing a residential preferences study coming up. We're in the bulk of it. And what we're doing is we're working with voucher holders, both project-based and housing choice vouchers, both in the suburbs and in the cities, about where do voucher holders want to live? Where do they live? Is there a gap in between those things, and then why? And what are we gonna do about it? And so we may uncover some things during that study. So all sorts of things like that. We also, with the community choice demonstration program, we're working with families with children. We may find some, gain some information through that program too, that will help us understand that more. But, you know, we collect limited data on that. We don't collect information on why people live where they live. And so until we can answer that question, I think it's a hard question to answer.
And Mr. Chair, one brief follow-up. Does this include also information that would show if the person or family had disability in their household?
Councilmember Lilligren, we do track that. That's a required field that's reported to HUD, whether someone is living with a disability. So we have that data. About 45% of who we serve are people living with disabilities.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another question from Councilmember Bento.
I'm curious, the timing on the residential preferences study, how soon do you expect that to be?
Ms. Smith.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Bento, we hired a consultant. We're in the survey design stage. It'll include survey, in-depth interviews, and focus groups with, I'm gonna mess this up, I think, 400 voucher holding families from the suburbs, and 400 from Minneapolis and 400 from St. Paul. And then trying to understand the answers to these questions. And so we're in the survey and focus group design phase with the consultants right now. So the deliverable is supposed to be 12/31 of this year, but we've been delayed in some of this, so I think it'll be past that. But we're coming before you with an information item in a couple weeks on that program.
Mr. Chair, if I could, why only 400 from the suburbs?
Ms. Smith.
It's a good question. Can I defer that until we come back on that program?
All right.
And I have.
Yep, please.
And then I would hope that somehow during the review of the results, that we could have a sit-down with our partners, and that would include other HRAs, but it would also include developers, to really go through and you know, all have the opportunity to dig in on that. I'm also interested, based on Councilmember Johnson's question about disability, is what about age?
Ms. Smith.
As someone who's aging fast.
Councilmember, or Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Vento, yes, about 6% of who we serve are elderly, considered elderly.
Okay.
That seems low. Another question, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This demographic slide is fascinating to me, but is there a difference in disability percentages between the housing choice vouchers and the project-based? Because, I mean, one would assume that project-based would have more disabled people, but I'm just curious.
It's a good question, Councilmember Wolf. We have the data. I didn't pull it for today, but I can pull it.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for now?
Good question. That's what I was thinking.
Seeing none, Ms. Smith.
Okay. Just to give you a heads up, I have 35 slides and we're on 10. So I'm just
We're
wanting
about
to
almost
put
through.
that out there.
We're really interested. Maybe we should stop having questions until the end.
Yeah, maybe.
So our current policy in the Housing Choice Voucher Plan regarding project-based vouchers at the Metro HRA will operate a PBV program using up to 20% of its vouchers. That will offer project-based vouchers in the following ways. So either independent request for proposals, which would be in advance of Minnesota Housing's RFP or in conjunction with Minnesota Housing's RFP. For 20 years, we did it in conjunction with Minnesota Housing's RFP process, where we would just offer them when developers are coming in to apply for other public financing, they would apply for the vouchers. We had requests from developers in 2020, including Beacon Interfaith, to change that, to award them ahead of time. So we've done that since 2020. And then to prioritize PBVs in our own service area is the current policy. Staff is not making any recommended changes to these policies, but we're going to dig into those in a future slide so I can gain your feedback and your input on those items. Also in the administrative plan is the variables that are considered when determining PBV offer and award each year. One is the overall utilization of the program. Do we have vouchers available? And as I indicated, we ended 2022 at 99.7. Vouchers utilized, we do have turnover vouchers, which I'm going to dig into in a couple of slides. We're looking at our current voucher turnover rates, as I just stated. We're looking at our funding and our budget. In a sequestration year, we're not going to award project-based vouchers because we're not going to have any, right? Because we're going to have a funding cut. And that's an extreme example, but are things that have happened. We're trying to balance PBV and waiting list admissions, so trying to serve both. You know, I think would be a bad thing to have a waiting list sit there for 10 years and people are waiting 10 years for a voucher. But that's a decision for you all to make. And then other work plan initiatives. In terms of considerations for the project-based voucher program, there are lots of additional requirements for PBVs that we don't have for housing choice vouchers. We need to issue RFPs and review applications. You know, certainly a difference if you get 20 applications or 4, but the number of PBVs makes a difference in how many applications we're going to get. We need to make a formal award. That takes time. We are required to do environmental reviews on every PBV project that comes online, whether it's existing housing, new construction. That's a requirement. We need to monitor prevailing wage, so Davis-Bacon wage reviews. We just broke ground on Vista 44, which Metro HRA awarded 50 project-based vouchers on that, but we need to monitor prevailing wage. So it's reviewing payroll of every worker that works on that project during the entire stage of construction, which is a year. So it's a lot of work. And, you know, I'm not saying it's not important, but I'm trying to help everybody understand how much work this is. But subsidy layering reviews, doing a formal review to make sure there's not duplicative or excessive subsidy in the project. We're doing building lease up, so if we bring on 50 units of project-based vouchers, we have to have staff to enroll 50 people for October 1st, for example, if that's when a building opens. And then filling turnover units. So as I indicated, after a year, project-based voucher occupant can call and request or email and requested housing choice voucher, and then it just takes time to do that. Trying to quantify some of this is really difficult because it's not like if we do PBVs, we're not going to do home ownership. It's, you know, some of it's not comparing apples to apples. So I'm just trying to quantify some of this without saying it costs $5,000 here or $10,000 here. Because a whole group of us got together and tried to figure out how to quantify some of this. But some quantification I can do here is we have coordinator 2s working on project-based vouchers. Coordinator 1s have a straight housing choice voucher caseload. Project-based vouchers have more nuances to them. We're tracking vacancies, we're tracking rule differences. You know, if Unit 202 is a project-based unit, and an owner tries to fill Unit 102 with a PBV, someone's gotta go ding, 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 that's not the right unit. And there are a lot more rules with project-based vouchers, so we have coordinator twos assigned. Coordinator twos have a 20% reduction in their caseload size to allow for that additional work that happens. Need for higher level of expertise because of the varying rules. Unit lease up and turnover is different with the project-based voucher program. And then increased monitoring and compliance, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about that in a future slide, so if I can defer that, questions on that. So here's sort of a current status update where we are today. Although the Metro HRA has 7,257 vouchers, only 6,839 have a PBV option. There are a few programs we have that federally don't have a PBV option. So as I'm looking at this chart, actually I'm gonna back up. HUD allows up to 20% as PBV. So for us today, that's 1,367 vouchers that we can PBV while remaining within that 20%. In recent years, HUD made a change to allow an additional 10% of vouchers as PBVs for units that serve specialized populations or that are in low poverty areas. So that means we could go up to 30% as PBV instead of 20. Right now, we have 978 PBV units that are awarded. So the chart at the right shows the 978 in the light blue chunk of the pie. We could project base another 389 vouchers and remain within your current policy limit of 20%. As the light blue chunk of pie grows, so as we award more project-based vouchers, the dark blue part of the pie, which are housing choice vouchers, tenant-based, shrinks. So we're taking from one bucket to fill another, is what happens when we do this because we don't get new vouchers. So it's just reprioritizing who uses those vouchers and where they get used. So we're currently at 14% of our program as project-based vouchers.
Oh, question from Councilmember Bento.
Mr. Chair, I should know the answer to this, but I don't. So I've lived in a project-based unit for a year. I call and I want one of the tenant-based vouchers. Do I go to the head of the list?
Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Bento, yes, the regulations require that we serve PBV movers before we serve the waiting list.
So we could have somebody on a tenant-based list for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and somebody else is gonna jump ahead?
Councilmember Lilligren, absolutely, it happens all the time.
I'm glad I asked that question, thank
You
you.
know, we call it skipping the waiting list, is what it's known as housing authorities, and so, you know, some people may do that intentionally, other people may move into for example, a supportive service environment. We have a project that you have to have an educational component and goals and meet with counselors and stuff in order to live there, right? They may move in there and maybe they decide they don't want to do that anymore. They don't want, that's not a good fit for them. They take a voucher and move. So there's all kinds of things. It's not just people intentionally skipping the waiting list. So I don't want to make it sound like that. There are all kinds of things like that. Maybe that building isn't a good fit. Maybe the location isn't a good fit. All kinds of things and why people want to move. Location is definitely one of them.
Great. I have questions from Councilmember Carter, then Councilmember
Okay, I'll be
Johnson.
quick.
Councilmember, I'm sorry.
So when, thank you, Mr. Chair. When somebody decides to give up their project-based voucher and they will then take a Metro HRA tenant-based voucher, we then have a voucher that's floating probably that we can get to give them on a tenant-based, but we still have to retain the project-based voucher. So that in and of itself, how many of those, I guess, I'm just trying to figure out in a year's time or what are we dealing with?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Johnson, I have a slide on that.
Okay.
Coming up on how turnover vouchers are used, but you're right, they take one of our turnover vouchers and then we refill the project-based unit with a new applicant.
Mr. Chair, just briefly,
please.
maybe it's on your other slide too, but could they switch to a different HRA? Or do they have to stay with us when they have the right to move?
Ms. Smith.
Councilmember Lilligren, we have what's called an initial use requirement in place. that requires someone to live in our jurisdiction for 12 months before they can move. But if they're in a project-based voucher in our unit, that qualifies for 12 months, then they can move wherever they want.
And go to a different, Mr. Chair, and go to a different HRA service area. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. A question from Councilmember Carter.
This is probably along the same line of questioning, and I didn't see it in the slides upcoming. But the question is, what % of project-based vouchers are turned back in? I'm thinking that the supportive services is very attractive. I don't know the percentage that are supportive services, but if you have this information in a later slide, I can certainly wait, or if we need to get it later. The question is, what percentage of that turn back happens during an average year? Can you give us a sense for whether there is an average year at all?
Smith?
Chair Lilligren, I have a slide about how turnover vouchers are used for initially filling PBV units and then giving to the PBV movers.
Yeah.
I don't have it split out today with support service developments versus general occupancy.
And it's
We have
okay, it doesn't have to be split out, but I didn't really see, and I can wait for and ask the question again if I don't see, what percentage of those vouchers are turned over in a year?
I have a slide that may get at that
Okay, thank you.
coming up.
Ms. Smith?
So this slide shows the percentage of developments, what type of the developments they are and unit type. So for example, we have the blue lines are the percentage of the development that are this type. So we have does that say 33%?
Yeah.
My goodness. 33% of our developments are general occupancy. Conversely, 60% of the units, so a higher number of units, are general occupancy. And it's just the opposite with supportive service development. So 51% of our project-based developments contain supportive service components, but only 32% of the units are supportive service. And the reason that is many of the large project-based voucher developments where we were awarded separate vouchers from HUD, so they're not part of this competitive process, like for the council-owned 154 units are included in that. We have a large building that contains 100 PBVs, it's Parkview Villa. Wasn't awarded through competition, we just got vouchers from HUD because they were opting out of a long-term contract. So, and most recently, the project-based vouchers that we have awarded have gone to supportive service developments. And although in a few cases, the full development has project-based vouchers, in many cases, it's, you know, maybe 4 units in a market rate building or a building that has a variety of income levels in it, but maybe only 4 have the project-based voucher. So that's sort of the reason. Developers can get funding for their tax credit applications if they agree to serve, for example, and I'm not an expert here, I'm just kind of making this up, but if they, you know, have some units that serve people experiencing homelessness, for example. So, and then we have a small number of developments that have both general occupancy units and supportive service units. Here's another way to look at that. 18 of our developments are general occupancy, but that includes 588 of the 978 awarded PBVs. 28 developments are supportive service, but that only represents 317 units. So you get where I'm going here. I just think showing the unit split would be helpful for you.
I can't see these colors.
In terms of how, and there's a lot of words on here, so I'm going to summarize this, but this is the language that's in our administrative plan today in terms of how we fill PBV units. So general occupancy units are filled from the waiting list. And I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. Units that have supportive service components, so these 317 units, either are coming through coordinated entry, they're coming from service partners, they're coming from county providers, they're coming from other sources outside the waiting list. I say that, but we also do outreach to our waiting list applicants to see if they qualify for the supportive services if they're experiencing homelessness, for example. And that is a hard thing to do because people's circumstances change so much. But in general terms, this is how we fill the units. This is, I think, an interesting thing to point out too. So between 2021 and 2023, this is sort of a snapshot of how we're filling general occupancy units. And again, they're filled from the voucher waiting list. We have one waiting list that's 1,900 people today, roughly. We have a vacancy come up in St. Francis, let's use. It's a 2-bedroom in St. Francis. And we reach out to the first 200, 300, 400 people on the general waiting list. Hey, we have a vacancy in St. Francis. Are you interested? They're not interested, they can just not respond and they remain on the Section 8 waiting list. If they're interested, they go look at it, see if they're interested. The further out the units are, our experience has been we have to do more and more of these mailings because less people want to live in units further out. That's just our experience. For example, between 2021 and 2023, we did 103 mailings to over 10,000 households to fill project-based voucher vacancies. Once we exhaust our waiting list, so say for the we monitor the waiting list separate for each development. I know I'm getting in the weeds, but I think it's important, or I wouldn't. We monitor for the St. Francis development. We monitor to make sure we reach out to everyone on that waiting list that would qualify for a 2-bedroom in St. Francis. Once we do that, the waiting list is exhausted for them and they can fill those units on their own by providing direct referral to us. And so we do that for, 55 developments. It's a lot, and it's important because these are important developments. So I don't want to make it sound like I don't think these are important units that are serving a need, because they are incredibly important. For example, we have a property in Waconia. It's a general occupancy project. We've had a contract with this owner since I think it's 1997, one of our earlier developments, but they have 1 and 2 bedrooms. The owner has trouble filling the vacancies, primarily due to location, and this is right now happening. But we mailed to 950 waiting list applicants for that project to fill 2 units. And it's just because it's further out there, so not as many people want to live there. And we've tried things over the years by tailoring our mailings to people that live in Carver County, for example. But then we find out there's someone in Ramsey County that maybe does want to live there. And so there's no perfect process to get at that. But what I'm getting at is it takes a lot to fill some of these units. The units that are closer into the core, like I think of our family affordable housing program, the units in Roseville fill in a hot second. And people that want a Roseville unit are going to be waiting for a Roseville unit for a long time because they don't turn over as much. It's, so I'm just trying to sort of articulate some of this process.
Terry, I have a question from Councilmember Johnson.
I'll pass, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Smith.
We recently added a new manager of quality assurance, focusing on quality assurance and quality control. Chang Lao, she was a previous manager that just switched roles with us. But our programs have grown in numbers, but also in complication and rules. And, like I talked about the emergency housing vouchers and service fees that can only be spent on this, and getting referrals through coordinated entry. So we added a manager to our work unit to help us with some of these things. But one of the things she's doing is looking at PBVs and looking at PBV. She recently did a PBV vacancy audit, so thank you, Chang. I know you're listening in. And so, as I indicated, we have 978 PBVs total. In January, we had 73 vacant PBV units, so that's 8% of total PBV units that were vacant in January. In July, this is something that we're looking at every month, but it's a new thing for us in January. In July, we had 91 vacant units in PBV units, so that's 9% of PBV units that were sitting vacant in July, meaning we didn't make a payment on them. And so Chang I'm going to have a slide on what we're doing about it next, but I think it's important to point out that one project has the highest vacancy rate. It's a project for youth experiencing homelessness, and there were 8 out of 39 units vacant in January at this project, and last month there were 16 out of 39 units vacant. That's 41% of a project, with 41% of the project is vacant units. And It's important because those 16 vouchers could be serving 16 households on the waiting list. And I get that's not perfect either, but we think it's important to dig into this. Services matter.
Terry, a
Yeah.
question from Councilmember Chambliss on this?
Yeah, I don't know that we necessarily need an answer today, but I'd like to revisit some of the challenges with maintaining residency in those units, because we did talk about that in the past. And there were some significant barriers, even push out, even some cultural friction that occurred that can be a factor, so.
Thank you. And I would just observe, it kind of blows my mind that those vacant units are designated for youth experiencing homelessness. That's what you said, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and just at so many tables I'm at, all I hear is there's nowhere for youth to go who are experiencing homelessness. So I just feel a disconnect here. So, yeah, thanks.
I think monitoring vacancies takes time, something we don't do with the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And services matter, so there are a lot of these new developments provide service provisions and important services that, in this particular project, young people maybe need to be successful. And so I think service projects are incredibly important, but not all low-income people need services. So I just think it's important that we keep that in mind as we're moving forward. But what are we doing about this? Chong, our new manager, has been in contact with the owner, developers, and property managers and has done outreach to all the owners and developers that either have systemic vacancies or long-term vacancies. And there's a variety of reasons why, but we're asking the question, why are they vacant? What can we do to help you fill them? At some point, do we remove the projects from the PBV contract for owners that have systemic vacancies? And that's certainly not our first thing we're gonna do. We're gonna work with them to try and get the vacancies filled, but we're gonna be monitoring on an ongoing basis. We haven't monitored it. We've had reports, it's just a staffing capacity issue, but we're gonna start monitoring which projects have vacancies. I think there's certainly some cases where a PBV unit was number 202 and they moved a market rate tenant into that unit because a property manager didn't realize it was a PBV unit. So it's all of those kinds of things too, and so we're trying to figure out the answer to why and what we can do about it going forward. I think the other thing is we're working with our communications department to add a specific page to our website about PBVs that would be helpful for owners and developers and as staff turnover at properties to be helpful on what the process is for PBVs. So shifting gears a little bit here about the Housing Choice Voucher waiting list as we're talking about how we fill PBV vacancies. And many of you know this, but we last opened our list in June of 2022. We received 11,000 applications requests in 1 week. And we randomly placed 2,000 on the waiting list during that process. So you can do the math, but 9,000 households did not even get put on the waiting list. And now once they're on the waiting list, they'll wait 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years for a voucher for their name to come up on that list. And from that list where we added 2,000 last June of 2022, there are 1,939 applicants that remain on that list. So we've hardly touched it. And I think part of the reason is we had several hundred on the previous list from 2019 because we don't wait till we get to 0 to open the waiting list again. So I think we had 400 people left on that list when we reopened. So we finally served those. Now we're into the new list, and that matters because we have current addresses, we have current ways to get a hold of people, which is sometimes how people fall off the list as we can't find them.
Question from Councilmember Johnson.
And then briefly on this, the ones that were on the waiting list still that hadn't been served, the 400 and some, they remain. They don't
Yes.
have to start all over. Just 2,000 more get added to the list. I just want to be clear on that.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lilligren and Johnson, yes.
Thank you.
They get served first.
Ms. Smith.
There's been a lot of talk about our housing choice voucher. We call them success rates, and that's kind of our term that we use. But it means people that get a voucher for the first time coming off the waiting list that are able to use it. this is the first time we've dug into it like this and separated it out with regular housing choice vouchers versus special purpose vouchers. But overall, the success of voucher holders that are able to place it, and these are brand new people coming off the waiting list for the first time, or a new admission for the first time, 65% are able to use their voucher. And yes, that means 35% come back unused. And that's for a variety of reasons. I think there have been some messaging around in the community that it's because they can't find a landlord willing to rent to them. And I would say certainly that's a piece of it. But there are also lots of other reasons. Maybe they got their voucher first in Minneapolis, because when waiting lists are open, people apply all over the place because waiting lists are closed and they're long. Maybe someone's circumstances change. Maybe they moved in with someone, have a roommate now so they can afford their own rent. Maybe their circumstances change. And so maybe they no longer need a voucher for whatever reason. And so 65% lease up. For housing choice voucher holders, the broader voucher population, that percent is 55. And for people with these special purpose vouchers like emergency housing vouchers, mainstream, VASH, FUP, all these acronyms, I apologize, it's 80%. And I think it's because they're some of our hardest to house neighbors and friends, and they're getting help with things like housing search assistance. And landlord recruitment, I think, is the reason for that. So we're excited to be able to share that and to break that down a little bit further, not only for ourselves, but for you all. In terms of considerations, and you've seen this slide before, but as you know, HUD does not provide new vouchers for project basing. They come from a limited supply of turnover vouchers that serve all of these purposes. So they're going to the waiting list applicants. They're initially filling PBV units. So as I indicated, if we bring on a 50-unit project-based voucher development, we need to have 50 vouchers to give those people. We can't just start printing more. It's not how it works. We have to have them. And so right now, we don't put vouchers on the shelf for project basing because we have enough turnover vouchers that we feel like we can fuel these developments as they come on. If we get to a certain point, I don't know what that point is, we will have to shelve vouchers to make sure that we have vouchers available when these developments come on. We're filling PBV unit movers, so those are people that are living in a PBV unit and want to move with a tenant-based voucher. We're absorbing vouchers from other housing authorities. We don't want to do that, but we have to. When someone arrives to Metro HRA with a Minneapolis voucher, so Minneapolis owns the voucher, they move to our service area, we can decide whether we want to bill them or we want to absorb them into our own program. If we absorb them, we use one of our turnover vouchers. We get about 50 to 100 every single month. So we can't bill for them all. I mean, we'd be billing for 2,000. You just can't do it. So we have to absorb some of those vouchers to ease the administrative burden. And then we have the waiting list preferences, which are going to things like the Homework Starts with Home program that you just learned about at your last meeting.
Terry, Ms. Smith, I have questions from Councilmember Carter and then Councilmember Johnson. Councilmember Carter.
I just want to make sure that I understand this chart. It looks simple enough, but I'm a little slow. If in 2022, of the project-based vouchers, 574 turned over during the year, does that mean then that we're taking those 574 and turning those into individual tenant-based vouchers? And then, okay.
Mr. Chair,
And then
Councilmember
leaving
Carter.
those 574 also as project-based vouchers?
Those 574 are available for something. We can either use them for, and I'm going to show a slide next, and 2 slides that shows where those vouchers have gone, but they can go to project-based movers, they can go to initially filling a project-based voucher unit, they can go to tenant-based. They have to be spread for all of these purposes. And I have about a slide, maybe in 2
Okay,
slides
maybe
that
that'll
will
help me.
articulate it a little
All
better,
right.
maybe.
Cool. Thanks. Councilmember Johnson.
Just briefly, and Terry, would you say again, how many are we absorbing, did you say?
I'm going to show you that in a couple slides.
Okay, and then just how many are we giving to, or how many are going to others from our area? Because it goes both
That
ways.
coming up?
Exactly. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank
Coming
you.
up.
Yep.
Take it away, Terry.
So these are the reasons. Oh, I want to also note that this slide does not include port out absorbs, and that's what we call them. I know it's a technical term, but port out absorbs mean they move somewhere else and the other housing authority absorbs them into their own
Oh,
program.
port out absorbs.
And because they're unreliable, we don't sort of include them when we think about how we're gonna use our vouchers, because it's an unreliable thing that we don't control and the numbers are inconsistent.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, and as you can see here, and this is 2022, 30% of our turnover vouchers came from this absorbed category. Moved out of our service area, the other housing authority absorbed them. We have some people that voluntarily dropped from the program. We have some expired vouchers. We have some violation of program obligations, why the voucher comes back. Some people that are deceased, some that are over income. Very few are evicted. And our stats are getting better on no reason listed. Our staff is better at reporting that. So we have
Question
some
from
pretty good
Councilmember
data.
Craig.
Just very quick, this is of all vouchers. This is not just project-based.
Right, this is all vouchers,
Gotcha.
correct.
Ms. Smith.
So this slide, and I apologize that it's kind of small, but this shows 2020, 2021, and 2022. So we'll look at 2020, and let's just look at that first green column, which is, these are vouchers that were absorbed by other housing authorities. So you can see in 2020, housing authorities absorbed 256 of our vouchers. So those are slots we have to fill somehow. In 2021, that dropped to 96. And so you can see housing authorities were doing other things, maybe related to the pandemic, but they weren't absorbing very many vouchers. So had we relied on having 250 turnover vouchers in that chunk to do something with, and we don't have them, we'd be going, uh-oh, now what? We're in a little bit of trouble, right? So the reason I want to show this chart is some of the other voucher turnover reasons seem to be somewhat consistent from year to year, so it's a more reliable source, but these absorbed vouchers are hard to completely rely on, and the numbers fluctuate a bit. So this is how we've used our turnover vouchers, okay? So this is looking at in 2021 and 22, so let's look at 2022, because we had the 574 vouchers or whatever to use it some way. 112 went to the waiting list. 299, we absorbed vouchers from other housing authorities. 145 went to PBVs, and 75 PBV to HCV means they're one of those PBV movers that took a voucher and moved. And the important thing in this chart, I think, is that in 2021, you can see that 161 of our turnover vouchers went to the PBV program. In 2022, 220 of our turnover vouchers went to the PBV program. Conversely, only 31 vouchers in 2021 went to the waiting list. In 2022, 112 went to the waiting list. So because we've awarded more PBVs in recent years, we've flipped that. It used to be that waiting list got more of the vouchers and PBVs got less. And so you can see the more PBVs we award, we could get to a point where we're not even serving our waiting list. And I would say how, that's our business, is serving low-income people, but also serving our waiting list.
A question from Councilmember Wolf.
Just a comment, Mr. Chair, and we need to keep in mind that the PBVs are 1/6 of the volume of our other types of vouchers. So when you're looking at these numbers, keeping in mind the percentage, when you're looking at getting from the waiting list, that's like less than 2% of the program is turning over, where you look at going from PBV to housing choice voucher conversions, that's over 7% of the program. So if you make it bigger, it's going to be an even bigger disparity in terms of how many people are going into which bucket.
Thank you. Question from Councilmember Vento.
Mr. Chair, just a comment. I'm going to have to leave shortly.
Okay.
And I really regret that, because this has been a really rich discussion, and I actually hope that we can continue the discussion at our next meeting. But before I leave, I earlier asked Terri about this, and I'd appreciate at some point before you finish tonight, having her repeat her response to me. I'm very concerned about the talk at the federal level of a government shutdown between now and the end of this fiscal year, December 31st. And I would appreciate it if Terri, you'd share that information at some point as to what the impact will be on our HRA and all HRAs. I believe it plays a really important role in how we think about our housing plan this year and what we think we can and can't commit to. So it's not to say that it has to rule our decision-making, but it certainly needs to be a factor. And just so that you don't think I'm gonna go have a fun time, I'm going to a city council meeting, so.
Well, that sounds like a fun time.
Yeah.
Wait, I don't mean to suggest that wasn't gonna be fun, but you,
That's been thousands of
I'm not going out to play.
And just to pause for a second on the time, and this is what I would propose, if this is fine with committee members. I'd like to get through this. I think it's good that we've had the time to ask our questions. We are obviously gonna need some pithy discussion on this, and so I think we'd put it on our next CDC agenda to have the discussion part. But I think it's good to get this information and also to get our questions answered tonight. Yeah, Councilmember Mento.
Well, and if I could add, I wasn't here for our last meeting and didn't have the opportunity to hear in person all of the folks who spoke at the last meeting, but I want you to know that I was homesick, but I was watching virtually, so I was present but not present for the purpose of the meeting minutes. And I know that there are other committee colleagues who aren't here tonight. They have that opportunity to go back and watch this meeting, and I will certainly watch the portion I'm going to be missing here. But thank you, Terri. This is a really good presentation.
Agree. And Ms. Smith, I know we're going into the summary of public comments, and that's kind of the point of the agenda item, but this has been really helpful, and I think all committee members are finding it valuable. I had one question, it actually came up sort of in the beginning, and then I was trying to be patient, and it could have fit in a couple of different places, but I've managed to hold it until now. And before we move into the summary of public comments, you used a term or a word or vocabulary early on when you were talking about the impact of PBVs on proposed developments and on their ability to attract or score well in other public funding application processes. And the word you said was even a loose commitment. Those were the words you used. Even a loose commitment of PBVs increase the scoring potential of a project. And what is that a thing? A loose commitment? What does that mean?
I need to polish up, Mr. Chair, I apologize. So when the last few times we've issued since 2020, when we've offered PBV awards, what we've done, and which is in the policy document since 2020, is that we offer a preliminary commitment to PBV developers. So like this year, we offered 40 PBVs. The developers that were the highest scoring for those 40 PBVs, we gave them letters of intent for sort of an informal commitment of PBVs. They submit that with their application to Minnesota Housing when they're, most times they're going in for tax credits, and I'm dangerous, I don't know all the language around that, but most of them are applying for tax credits. They get additional points on their tax credit application for having those PBVs in there.
Because of the letter of intent.
Correct. Then if they get funded, we will award, I will come before you as a policy recommendation to make a formal award of those PBVs. If they don't get their financing, they have to come back through later and apply for PBVs again when they're next offered. Kind of like the tax credits. If a developer doesn't get their tax credits this year, or if they don't get their tax credits this year, the process is over and they have to come in and apply again, right? So it's a little bit different, but we're going to talk about a little bit about that in one of the slides during the public comment period.
Thank you. Thanks for that explanation.
Mr. Chair, did you want me to address the question about the government shutdown?
Do you want to do that now? Do folks
Or should
want
we
to?
wait?
Yeah, maybe Sue can.
It's quick, I think.
Oh, sure, please then, yeah.
So Congress needs to either pass a federal budget by the end of this month or agree on a continuing resolution, which will provide agreement to fund the government at the current level, at this year's current level, for a certain period of time to continue to fund the programs. If they don't do that, the government will go into a federal shutdown. And we've been obligated housing assistance payments through October at this point, so we have enough, we call them HAP dollars, to pay subsidy through October. If the government shuts down, unless they find additional money, some money might not just be dispersed, and tenants could be subject to eviction. And so it could be real bad, but I'm confident they'll pass a continuing resolution because the consequences are great.
I admire your confidence, Ms. Smith.
So,
I think we call it willfully optimistic. One thing that we've had to address in the past when we have faced government shutdown is how we use council funding to cash flow ourselves. We do sometimes borrow from our colleagues in other divisions. There's a certain amount that we can cash flow, and Councilmember Johnson, you're probably most familiar with this as management committee. But if we do need to go beyond kind of those reserve levels, that's where we would be bringing an action in front of you all for some assistance to do that in order to cash flow over a longer period of time than what we might otherwise expect. We do have a healthy reserve balance for that within HRA. That hasn't always been the case when we've faced government shutdowns in the past.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Councilmember
just to finish that up as Chair of Management. So when we've had to do that, we do get paid back once the federal money flows retrospectively, correct?
Mr. Chair, we've never had to do it before.
Okay, we came close and we were preparing, but
There was a federal government shutdown back in 2019, but the funds that were previously obligated covered the rent, so we didn't have to withhold any rent.
Okay.
We
Sorry.
made plans, but didn't do it.
Okay, that's okay. Thank you very
know.
much.
Yeah, thank you. Very good to know. Thanks.
It's different than sequestration, which did not
Right,
turn out
yes.
well at all.
No, that was
Yes.
brutal.
Yes.
Ms. Smith, on to the summary of
Okay,
public
so-
comments.
That was sort of the data and the background. Now this gets into the public comments that we've received. So the Metro HRA received 31 comments during the public comment period, all from affiliates of Beacon Interfaith Collaborative, all related to project-based voucher program, and essentially requesting the same policies which are outlined in the upcoming slides that I'm going to talk about. I think it's important to point out there's been a lot of information out there, and I think developers have been engaging you all in some information, and some of it's not accurate. And so I think it's important that at least one example in the main public comment document that was submitted by Beacon had some inaccurate information. And I just feel important to state this. Project-based vouchers are the key that unlock both housing availability and equity. Tenant-based housing choice vouchers only offer a choice for 30% AMI households to live where deeply affordable rent options exist. Suburban families that receive tenant-based vouchers often have no choice other than to move to the central cities to find housing they can afford. The Met Council has the power to remedy this by connecting Metro HRA PBV policies to the CDC's larger affordable housing goals. And this is inaccurate for a few reasons. Metro HRA is assisting over 7,200 housing choice voucher holders, and they afford units of their choice in suburban locations that are not in the central cities. So people are using our vouchers in the suburbs and are not moving always to the central cities. The point of our suburban program is to provide choice in the suburban cities, and that's what we're doing on a daily basis. Housing 18,000 people, nearly 10,000 children with the vouchers that we have in the suburbs. So that's an inaccurate statement. PBVs, on the other hand, restrict choice as households are only offered the unit that is available at that time. So I just think it's important to point out that that is an inaccurate statement.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember
May I just
Johnson.
add, and correct me if I'm wrong, just going back in my 4 years of learning about all this, but also we've made changes to the program where we now have adjusted the rents based on zip codes so that we can also provide lower income families the ability to have higher rent subsidies in potentially some of those suburban communities where they demand usually higher rents, so that they're not locked out and forced geographically into lower rent neighborhoods. Would that be correct?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Johnson, that's exactly accurate. And the statement that choice for 30% AMI to live where deeply affordable rental options already exist. The point of the voucher is to make the unit deeply affordable for families, and the adoption that we did back in 2020 with your approval as policymakers was to adopt those small area fair market rents to make the units more affordable to families, to bring their rent burden down closer to 30%. So that's accurate.
And Mr. Chair, just one quick
Councilmember
follow-up.
Johnson.
And Terry, because that was already, well, in pandemic and everything, but, and we are seeing an increase then of people who've been able to afford themselves the opportunity to live since we made that change where before that they may not have.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember, yes, that's accurate, and new fair market rents just came out on Friday, and so we haven't even dug into them yet, but we have an upcoming information item with you all where we'll provide data on, you know, where we've been with the adoption of small area market rents and the impact that they're making.
Right.
And Mr. Chair, not to belabor it, but, and if there's information, and if not, I get it, because it's coming out fast, but just where we can also dig into the disaggregated data on race, age, and disability, just to see what is taking place to the best of our ability on what information we have in those communities. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Green. Question from Councilmember Carter.
Very quickly, it's good to see the map that you started with that shows the communities that are served. And it is important to note that those are the places where people are living with these vouchers. It would also be helpful to see a scatter map or to understand what percentages of those vouchers are being used in what locations. So if you can return with that, that would be helpful.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Carter, that's sort of one of our standard maps that will show when we're talking about adopting new rent limits for the program in October. I think I'm coming before you in mid-October.
Thank you.
With that.
Ms. Smith.
Okay, so the comments that were received fall into 5 buckets, and I think all of the public comments we received had, I think the first 4 buckets here of comments, and then a few of them reference this state rent assistance program. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go through each one of these. I have a slide on each one, but I'm not going to read them here because I'm going to read them in the next slides. So one of the main comments requested was that the council adopt a 30 for 30 is how it's raised, but requesting that we commit 30% of our vouchers to project-based. And as you know, and as we've talked about in the previous slide, our current policy is that we will PBV up to 20% of vouchers. Our current state is that 14% have been project-based. There's a typo in the number. It should be 978, and I have it as 970. With Chong doing some recent audits, and it's 978. And that we have 389 remaining that can be project-based before we get to that 20% mark. That our average annual turnover of vouchers is 532, so that's sort of the number that we're working with that can be used for those variety of purposes. And then on the public comment request side, that we PBV 30% of our vouchers, and I just have some questions here that I'd like you to weigh in on, and I'm curious and just trying to think through some of this, but why change to 30% when we haven't hit the 20% mark? And in order to get there, we'd have to project-base 389 vouchers. So essentially committing most of our turnover vouchers to project basing in the next couple of years if we're going to get there. Once the max.
Question from Councilmember
Just, and again, briefly, so I'm just trying to understand what the federal regulation is around this. So we can go up to 30% project-based vouchers. Is there also, and is that at 50% AMI or below?
Councilmember Lilligren, the federal regulations for both the housing choice and the project-based voucher program allow service to families at or below 50% of AMI. I think some of the public comment requests were that we prioritize 30% AMI developments. I inquired with HUD on whether we could even do that because the federal rules allow people that are at 50% of AMI qualify for the program. And they said, no, we can't do that. But I think what's happening is some of the developments and some of their other funding streams are that they will serve people at 30% AMI. And so as those developments serve 30% of AMI, the occupants will be at that level. But so I think it's sort of confusing that I'm not sure that we could even prioritize 30% AMI developments if we wanted to for project basing, and I can commit to dig into that more for our next presentation.
Councilmember Johnson, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's really important because there are moving parts. And I just want to make sure that, because we are all very, very committed to this, solving all of the problems here. But I also don't want to eliminate vouchers for people at the 50% if we're hitting a limit at 30, if that makes sense. So I'm not even sure I'm saying this question right, but I don't want to eliminate over 30% AMI to 50% AMI, even, I'll get to that when we get to the next round to help me figure this part out. But I've asked the question and I know this much about, but you know, to your point, I think you were talking about tenant-based vouchers and that's factoring in, or I don't know, but I just want to make sure that we don't have an unintended consequence in this as well, if that makes sense.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Johnson, the federal regulations require that we serve 75% of our overall program, tenant-based and project-based vouchers, serves 75% of the households served have to be at or below 30% of area median income. And if a housing authority doesn't naturally hit that, then they're required to adopt preference policies and do outreach activities and serve people on the waiting list that they're at the lowest income brackets. But since I've been here, we've naturally hit that and have not had to do any income targeting.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Lindstrom.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just real quick, one thing I'd be curious to know more about 2 weeks from now is the ramifications of the new quarter-cent sales tax.
It's on a slide, right?
Right now?
No.
On the next slide. Oh, okay.
Slides
Well, if
later.
you could get to that in 1 or 2 slides, that would be awesome.
Yes, I have a handful of slides left, and that's one of
Okay,
them.
thank you.
But important to know that once we hit our max, 30% is the max, you can't go any further. And, there are some intricacies to that, but it's important. Once the resource is gone, it's gone, right? And then I think, the biggest thing is having a 30% PBV. If you, as policymakers, say, okay, staff, make it happen, can we make it happen? But it doesn't mean other work won't suffer, right? And it's hard to quantify some of this. And these are some of the things in our work plan for this year, but that also carry over into next year. But exploring a home ownership program, continuing expansion of our Homework Starts with Home program, implementing our community choice program, conducting our residential preferences study, completing capital improvements on our council-owned housing units each year, which we do each year, issuing and leasing the emergency housing vouchers that we've received, issuing a property management company RFP and awarding new contracts, re-envisioning our landlord engagement strategy, which we're in the midst of, implemented mass texting options for inspections to help to communicate people the way they want to be communicated with. And this is just a taste, applying for new vouchers when they come available, going for new funding, and all of these things take staffing time as well as PBV. So I think just important to point that out. So is it easiest if I stop after each recommendation, or do you want me to just go through them and then we'll discuss them at the next meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think let's
okay.
get through them, yeah.
This one is to make PBVs available across the entire 7-county region. Here's the map again, and it's different colors, but the Metro HRA service area is in blue. There's no other housing authority in the region that awards PBVs outside of their service area. And even though our service area is defined in Minnesota statute, we can operate in other service jurisdictions with their permission. We do have a handful of vouchers in Plymouth and Washington County, and the reality is PBVs have become more in demand. And so the reason we were created was to serve suburban areas that don't have their own HRA. And part of it is we have a large program, but we also have an extremely large service area. We're serving 96 communities, and the population, the Metro HRA serves service area contains 41% of the region's population. And so we have more vouchers, but our vouchers have to go a lot further. So I think it's important to state that. Like, for example, Richfield's population, they have their own housing authority. Their population is 36,000, and we didn't break that down according to income levels, and we can do that for the next meeting if interested. But they have a much smaller voucher program, but the vouchers don't have to go as far. So I think that's an important consideration as you're thinking about that. Coordinate awards with Minnesota Housing's RFP. Our current policy states we will do it in these two ways, as I indicated on a previous slide. The public comment request is for us to remove that we will do it in conjunction with Minnesota Housing's RFP as I understand it, and to always offer project-based vouchers in advance of that process so they can get their funding points, developers. And that's what I mean by their developers in general can get funding points. And I think it's important that we leave our options open. St. Paul always offers in conjunction with Minnesota Housing's RFP. Minneapolis has done it independently without that process. And I think maybe there's a year where we want to offer some independently, but then maybe we get some special purpose vouchers that we want to put in Minnesota Housing's RFP process. So having both options open seems like a good idea to me, but it's something that I'd like you to weigh in on for our next meeting. And allowing multi-year time frame to incentivize capital funding. This has been in all the public comments, and the current policy that we have requires developments to get full financing in the PBV award year to get that formal PBV award. And, you know, I think the reason we adopted, or the reason staff recommended that policy for your adoption back in 2020 is that it ensures vouchers can be used for other purposes during the construction period. Vista 44 was awarded vouchers in 2020, and they're just breaking ground. And so it tells that it takes several years, but, you know, Cranberry Ridge, we have vouchers in. I think they went in for tax credits 4 years in a row. And so if we get to the point where we're just shelving vouchers for all of, for several years while people get their financing, I think that may become problematic. But I am recommending maybe a policy update consideration for your consideration is that maybe we change the language to require PBV developments receive full financing by December 31st of the following year. So let them have that contingent PBV award for 2 years instead of 1 year. So it would allow developers 2 years to get their financing and not 1 year.
Councilmember Johnson.
I will strongly consider supporting this because I just know that while they're going through Minnesota Housing and lining up all the housing funding sources that they're getting, this also plays very strongly then at the local level. If they can hang on long enough, they might pick up a local piece that I know for certain projects has been tenuous because of the 1 year limit. So I really appreciate this for our consideration. I think we can keep some of those projects alive and help move them through more quickly, but at the same time, we can monitor this if we do move ahead and see how it works, and we'll hear from our development partners too.
Lots of nods on the committee, I would note, and it seems to me the strategy of the letter of intent in advance of the Minnesota housing process, does that actually shelve the vouchers, or we just need to be planning, right? The piper will, you know, need to be paid at some point. But, okay, cool.
Right, yeah, Councilmember, or Chair Lilligren, we wouldn't shelve them for a preliminary award.
Right.
It becomes, when it becomes a final award and you all approve it, then we need to make sure we have the vouchers available when we need them.
Thank you.
And then the last one is to utilize the PBV option of the new statewide rent assistance program. So as you all know, there was a historical housing package passed in the legislature during this session, including funding for a statewide rent assistance program. We do want to thank our partners at Beacon for their hard work on this over the last 4 years, because they're the ones that got it across the finish line, and it could change the lives of thousands of Minnesotans. But it's a state-funded rent assistance that could bring up to 5,000 new vouchers into our state. The vouchers would be administered by housing authorities, and they would be distributed or offered according to need in the American Community Survey. The legislative language includes an option for PBV. The PBV will be an option, but the rules for this program are not even out yet. Minnesota Housing hasn't really released any information. We don't know how many vouchers we're going to get or offered. I don't want to say get, because we're not that far yet, but we could get 1,000, and that would be impactful. And I do think it's important that we have a discussion with you all at a future date when those rules are released in terms of thinking about whether or not to project-based some of those and what that would look like. But I think it's premature to have that discussion because we don't know the rules yet.
Question from Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as council members will know, we've already enacted for the housing 0.25 and the transportation 0.75 that'll begin on October 1st. So that's gone through our process, but we don't control these housing dollars. So that's why it's going through Minnesota Housing. Also, Terry, just for some clarity, that was just a Metro sales tax, correct? And it says the vouchers to the state. Is it vouchers going to the state or is it for the Metro area?
Different, yeah.
Our Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Johnson, the Metro sales tax funds the vouchers in the region. There's another, the funding for the vouchers for outstate and other parts of the state are funded from another source of funds. Do you remember what it was, Lisa? Director Barajas?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, council members, I believe it was general fund cash infusion in this calendar year, and I don't recall future biennium, but using surplus in some other funds, so they don't have that reliable, they don't have a sales tax the way the Metro does. It's a little bit, it's a different funding source.
Mr. Chair, well, that's for sure. So, we have sustainable funding. The others may not, but I just appreciate that for the clarity of anybody listening. Our 25 cents will stay here. Okay. And then, well, you're not done with the slide, so.
No, I am done with this
Okay.
slide.
So, Mr. Chair, as I in talking with our friends at Beacon, I think this could be a game changer. But we have to wait and see because we don't know what we don't know. And so what I would hope is that as we move forward in developing what we'll be working on in 2024, that we have kind of an asterisk around this. And that once we understand what the program will bring here to the metro area, as it relates to vouchers, how we can serve the waiting list, what the impact might be on those project-based vouchers, additional supply. Even though we're not up to the 20%, it could alleviate though some of the pressure to get us closer to the 20%. I don't know. But I just want everybody to know that I think, for me, and I'm sure all of you, we are working like crazy to find the right places for the vouchers at the right time, for all the right people, in all the right ways. So because this is so new, I'm so thankful to Beacon. I love that the state is still calling it the Bring It Home program. They took that name on, and so I look forward to seeing what this can do as we go forward in the future. And I just really appreciate also that rule, or the potential of changing it to a 2-year time period for developers to secure their funding. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Really well said, and I agree. And we don't know. It's gonna be a different day, right? And so I look forward to having conversations, and but it did prompt one question, just listening to Councilmember Johnson. It prompted a question for me, and will the new state vouchers still be administered under our agency plan? This agency plan that we are approving, because this is a HUD thing, right? And so is the state thing gonna be different, or will we have more discretion? Or we just don't know?
Chair Lilligren, we don't know because the rules haven't come out from Minnesota
right.
Housing. We're hoping that it mirrors the voucher program. We do know they will prioritize 30% AMI households, so that's different than the voucher program, and they will target families with children, which is also different from the regular voucher program, but those are the only two things that we really know at this point.
Okay, I'll stop asking you questions that you can't answer. Councilmember Lindstrom.
And what's your guesstimate on when we will know? A month, 6 months?
It's a good question. I know there was a job posting from Minnesota Housing. They were hiring a director to oversee this program, so I'm assuming when that person is on board that we'll be engaging with them, and I'm on the board for the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, who hired a consultant to work with Minnesota Housing on designing, the program and the rules. And so hopefully we can be at the table to advocate for adequate administrative fee funding so housing authorities apply for the vouchers and can afford to operate them, so.
Sounds like it won't be next week. But
No other further questions, Councilmember Carter.
I just wanted to hear back again, those are funds or vouchers that we would, along with other housing authorities, apply for. So we don't know what would be in our bucket. And also, when the funds begin to be collected now, when will they be available for use?
Mr. Chair, the funds are available in fiscal year 24, 25, but since the rules aren't even out yet, it's, you know.
Well, we need
So
to
I think it's
understand the
unknown
rules.
at this point when we can start vamping up to, you know, take people, we don't even know what the waiting list will look like. Who are we serving? Do we have to open a waiting list? I mean, it's basic things like that we don't have any idea on yet that we're, you know, so I think it'll take some time to get the program up and running, but hopefully I can know more in the next month or, yeah.
Fingers crossed. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to make sure I have this straight in my head, nothing in here has any impact on that one because this is federal and that's state. So we'll have a totally different discussion with that one.
That's correct.
Right? Okay.
Right. Although, and I'm just playing devil's advocates here, the rulemaking could say it has to follow your, you know, your existing housing plan, other than the 50 to 30%.
Actually, we prefer
So,
that.
yeah, true. So stay tuned. Cool. I think that's it from Ms. Smith.
Yes, here's our timeline.
Bring her
Which will be
home.
pushed out, so I'll be back on September 18th, and we'll focus on the public comments and having a discussion on each one of those recommendations for your consideration. And then the timeline will be pushed out 2 weeks later, will be action.
For the rest of this, great. Okay, any comments, questions as we close it out here? Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to be sure that if we aren't taking any testimony tonight, just because of the length and everything, we encourage it, though, at the September, what's our
Is that
next
part
meeting
of
on
the
this,
plan,
18th?
No, we
Or-
already had the public
Oh,
testimony.
okay. So would we have taken testimony tonight, though, or?
I wasn't planning to.
Okay,
But I
I
knew this
know-
was gonna take a long time to get
Yeah, and I
through,
think
so-
people were signing in, and maybe that was just that they were here, but, or
Yeah,
maybe
no, I'm glad
some
they're-
had
yeah.
wanted to speak. I don't know about that part. I would say that if there's not an opportunity to speak at our meetings, to just keep emailing us and calling
Yeah,
us and.
I appreciate it, yep.
Yeah.
And keep advocating. I have a ton of things. I have a ton of things I want to say or discuss, but we'll defer those to the next CDC meeting. I would like to start sort of right here, right?
Yeah.
Where we left off, and then we can get into our discussion, which should be pretty rich. So, yeah, and I want to say thanks, Terry, thanks to Stephanie, your whole team. We are so lucky to have you in this position, and I'm sure you'll be advocating for us in the rulemaking with the additional vouchers that'll be coming through. But to have someone with your level of technical expertise within our organization, I think is really a blessing. So thanks.
And Mr. Chair, if I can just add, I love the
Please.
fact that you've got, I think you said Chong, working on the data side of this more. I mean, I'm sure you've always been working on data, but tonight there was a lot more clarity for me and just kind of
Agreed.
seeing visually. I happen to be a visual learner too, so your whole team's helping us to make, I think, good policy as we work, with partners.
Mr. Chair, just
Ms.
one
Smith.
more comment. If you think of things that would be helpful to see at the next presentation, or you didn't cover this and I'd like you to cover this, it'd be great to hear about those things, because if there are things I can provide that I didn't already provide, and I did make some notes of things to bring forward, so.
Would you like us to email those directly to you or through the director?
Sure.
Well, okay,
Either.
great, okay.
We've got the list.
Committee members, anything? Michelle?
No, I'm good.
Okay, Lisa, all right. Well, thank you everyone for being here, for sticking with it, and seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned.